All right, we are here today to talk about a topic that seems to be coming up a lot these days, quiet hiring. Not quite quitting, this is quiet hiring. And here's what I've read on it, right? Quiet hiring is the idea that when you have a need on your team and you can't fill it, what you end up doing is you just ask someone that's currently existing, like an existing staff person, to fill that need, do something different than they normally do. And so I think that's what the original idea was, but the term is seemingly expanded a little bit more. And I think we're going to talk about a different application of quiet hiring, right? Tell me a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think, quiet hiring seems to be the flip side of some of the quiet quitting things that we've heard about before, right? Quiet hiring is a little bit of a company's maybe reluctance to bring on new FTEs, and it may be for a really practical reason, right? They just don't have that expertise on hand. And as you said, one way to do that is to definitely teach a current employee a new skill set, and a lot of companies do that. The other idea, though, is actually contracting out for some of that help. And I think that's especially helpful because not a lot of companies have that kind of capacity within their current employee base. So the notion of, can I bring in some expertise from the outside, is becoming kind of an attractive idea. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm kind of psyched about that. Because I brought on my partners to talk about it today because we have seen a lot of this trend materialize in some client engagements that we've had. So I'm super excited to introduce Martha Porter-Fiszer and Marian Temesvary from the Health Mavens today, just to talk a little bit about this trend and how it's playing out really in the professional services side of the business. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, tell us a little bit, just walk us through very quickly, a little bit about how you got started in this space, and you can talk about your backgrounds if you want. Just give us an idea of how you started with Health Mavens.
Well, the three of us have known each other for a long time in different capacities, and we won't go into that because you need a glass of wine for the history. But at one point, about 3 years ago, we were sitting around talking about, okay, what's next in our careers? We had all left very senior level jobs in various areas. And we were talking about how do we put our collective experience to work and how do we help companies? We all have a passion for the health and wellness space. We saw a burgeoning, an actual explosion in startups and scale-ups in the space. And we realized from our former jobs that there were times when we really needed some senior level help, somebody who could come in with no internal agenda and no personal agenda to help us solve some key issues. So we created Health Mavens to help clients, to help fill that need for clients. And what we're finding is that there's a real need for this. There's a need for people who can come in and say, okay, I've kind of been at a senior level, so I understand it strategically, but I also have done all the jobs in each of the individual trees in the forest. So I can really help you figure out what the problem is or what the opportunity is and how to build growth around it. And that's not necessarily an FTE. That's not necessarily a long-term hire. It's really coming in to solve a specific thing at a specific point in time in the growth of a business.
I would add that we call ourselves solutioners. And what that means is we come at business growth challenges from a lot of different angles. I guess we're sort of solution neutral. And because we all come from different backgrounds on the corporate side, agency side, creative, commercialization, marketing, sales. So we bring all that to look at it sort of an all angles point of view on our clients. We don't have an agenda. It's just all about what's right for them, and we stick to the ask, to solve their challenges.
So I get that. Talk a little bit about some of the engagements and quiet hiring that you're seeing in maybe in practice, so people can kind of connect the dots on the opportunities that have actually been connected through some of these quiet hiring engagements that you've seen.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps one of the most important points is that most of the time, clients have a perceived problem. They think it's X. Problems don't always, the way they present themselves on the surface is not what's underneath, right? So they have a perceived problem. They come to us and they say, my sales and marketing team is misaligned and I'm not getting enough out of my agency. That's actually a real example of something from a client we've been working with. And then you come to discover, as you dig underneath, you discover there's a whole lot of things underlying that perceived problem. But until you actually uncover what those things are, you really don't know how to solve for it, right? So it would have been easy to say, well, I'm going to solve for this because that's what he thinks it is. But then we come in and we do some analysis and we bring that senior level strategic thinking to it. Also the understanding of the dynamics that are going on underneath to really figure out, okay, what is it that needs to be done? I will say that most of the time there's some sort of, in fact, for virtually all the time, there has to be a key inflection point. It's either a problem that needs to be solved. Sales isn't doing what it's doing. My advertising's failing. I don't know, whatever it might be. Or it's an opportunity. We have a new channel that we want to get into. We have a new product that we need to launch. We're a startup and we've never commercialized our product. It's a great idea, but we've never commercialized it. We don't have a brand, that sort of thing. So those inflection points are generally when we start. And a lot of times the ask is not where we end up going, the path we end up going down.
Another kind of scenario I would say is once it's time for activation, or let's say a company already has a big customer or they have some leads, but it's time to, pedal to the metal to get some new leads or to get some new business. So it's time for activation. And sometimes it's easier to contract out activation teams and specific specialties than it is, or while you're deciding, well, do I need an agency? What kind of agency do I need? Or if I'm going to build an in-house department, what seats do I have to fill? So it can help by contracting out those capabilities. And in fact, at Health Mavens, I think it's helpful because we understand how to manage those kinds of teams. And quite often, not for lack of understanding, but it's not in a lane of most businesses to understand how to run a creative team, right? Or an activation team.
Yeah, it can be an art, right? For sure.
Yeah.
So in thinking about quiet hiring, why do you think marketing services is particularly a good fit for quiet hiring in today's marketplace?
Oh, right. So I think a lot of it has to do with how marketing has changed so much over the years. And certainly it's changed a lot in 50 years. And that's a whole different podcast that I'd like to be in, actually. But in the last few decades, certainly in the last 10, there's this exponential growth of digital tools and marketing communications platforms. And with that has come this extraordinary need for specialization. And it's mind-boggling how many options there are. In 2010, I think there were like 150. And today there are over 9,000 Marcom platforms. That's like crazy. How could you possibly know which one is right for you strategically as a company? Let alone, how could you afford, once you figure those out, how do you know how many specialists to bring in and execute with that? So also with that has come then this crazy need for these unicorn people to fill roles, whether it's a chief marketing officer or chief growth officer who has to know automation, channel management, commercialization, how to do a social post or how to run a social campaign. And these people don't exist, right? So you need multiple resources to get
so
things
Martha,
done
question
now.
on that. Does that mean, are you saying that quiet hiring, though, can be a way then to to gain that skill set kind of in the interim when you need it, right? But can that skill set then be transferred back into the organization through a quiet hiring method, right? Because it's a temporary measure, is it not?
Yes, it is. And temporary can mean a few months, or in some cases, we're in over 2 years with a client. So that kind of depends. But yes, absolutely. Whether we're talking about a fractional role in a leadership position or an outsourced team to execute and activate, those people can help train and demonstrate, lead by example, while the company is figuring out, and while we might be helping them figure out exactly what seats they need or what skill sets they need to get, to reach their goals.
So you've acted, or you have folks that act as fractional leadership, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes, in fact, I've been in one of those seats, right? It serves as a bit of a control tower for what this client may need over time, right? Because if you're in a growth company, it changes, right? In the first year, when you have that momentum that you're trying to drive, you may need a certain level of expertise. And as that scales, your expertise will change.
Yeah, and there's another aspect to it. If you think about at a certain size of company, startup, scale up, medium sized company, it's to Martha's point. It's a very easy default to say you're in the leadership team and you're like, we need digital marketing, so we need to bring in a digital marketing agency, or we need to bring in a digital marketing specialist, right? Or it's easy to say, well, we're going into this new market, so I need a chief growth officer. Okay. We are in between those two, because if you bring in the digital marketing specialist, you can't expect the digital marketing specialist to understand actually where that digital marketing fits into an entire commercial activation plan, right? And a lot of times, if you bring in at that level, you bring in a chief growth officer, they may be looking at it on such a broad scale that they're not looking at the details that need to be applied to the situation, right? So we fit somewhere in between that. And again, to Martha's point, yes, some engagements are long. We have long-term engagements. Some engagements are short. And during that engagement, we figure out what the business needs. And we're absolutely more than capable of either transferring the capabilities in-house or hiring them on behalf of our clients and building the team that they need.
That's really different from what people would think of as traditional agency, right?
Yes.
Compare and contrast, Martha, on, how different is it from an agency relationship, do you think?
Well, and I don't want to disparage agencies, because there are a lot of great agencies and I've worked for them or with them. But typically you're going to see a lot of overhead with an agency, right? They have hours requirements that they have to bill. They also typically have a lane that they're in. So they, perhaps there's an agency that specializes in automation and lead generation, then all of their solutions are going to be sort of leaning in that area. I think too, there's a little bit of bringing in senior management to sell, to get you excited about working with them, but then here come the junior people to work on your business. So if you're if you're outsourcing those people, more specifically, if you're working with perhaps one of our teams, you're not going to get that, because, we don't have the overhead, and we're all just about the ask and scaling and scoping things accordingly.
Yeah, I guess I would say I've been in the agency business too. One difference is, we don't have a holding company that we're reporting into, right? So we're not beholden to a growth figure for a holding company outside of this little group, right? So it does speak to the agenda of, it's all about the client's growth needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's true of consultant groups too. I mean, some consultant groups are a lot like agencies, and there's great ones, but they often have a higher power that they answer to, or they also have a lane that they're in, and your solutions are going to look like, what is it? If the only tool you have is a hammer, then all your problems look like nails. So
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. So, Marian, how does this kind of, you spoke to the fractional example, you spoke to an example where you may bring in resources for an outsourced marketing group. You spoke to, new products and new markets. How does this relationship benefit clients specifically?
Well, I think there's a couple of key ways. So, not every Martha's point, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? But if you reverse that a little bit, we're kind of accustomed to the idea that everything that we think needs to be done in an organization needs a hire, right? There's a job description, there's a digital strategist, there's a this, there's a that, there's the other thing, there's a hire for it. The reality is that in certain sized organizations, not every job that needs to be done is a full-time job. And not every challenge or opportunity that needs to be handled can be handled by one person in one job, right? So I think this quiet hiring really works for companies and leaders of organizations that are flexible and that understand that and are 1000% focused on the problem, not how you get it solved. Right. And that, I think, is where they get the benefit of working with us. I mean, let's face it, there's three of us who are the principals, and then we have our team underneath us. But all three of us come at problems from different perspectives, from strength in different disciplines. Right. So a client will come, maybe I'm the lead on the engagement, but as you guys know, that doesn't mean I'm not sitting down with the two of you to work through the thorniest problems to figure out what the solution is that they really want. Right. And to put that solution together. So I think those are a couple of things that are real benefits. The clear, obvious one is not just whether or not you're hiring an agency with an agency's overheads, but let's face it, FTEs come with overheads of their own. And there's a level of commitment. I understand that people are, everything is, we hire employees at will, which means that if it doesn't work out, you can unbundle it. But how do you unbundle it? You've just spent whatever the percentage is above their salary. You have to pay unemployment. There's all kinds of things that come with suddenly figuring out that actually I don't need a full-time digital strategist because I need three other things that need to be done, right, to solve this problem. So huge benefit in that case. Also, startups and scale-ups that are answering to VCs or even to private equity, they may not have the approval to put FTEs on. To bring FTEs in-house. So those are the ways in which this, I guess the better way to say it is those are the kinds of organizations or situations in which this works really well.
Is there any watch outs, or is there any things that clients should really consider before entering into some agreement like that? Because I see the upside for sure. Right. Is there any things that you counsel people to be careful on?
If I were counseling people, I would say a couple of things. One of them is make sure that the people you work with, have expertise in the space you're in. I would say that's the number one thing, not generalists, because you see a lot of generalists out there. And I think that was one of the things Martha was alluding to. The other thing is, do they offer you exclusivity in a category? Like, for example, let's just be really specific. We're working in the oncology space. Well, we wouldn't work with any other clients in the oncology space because that would not be correct. It's one thing this is the other thing too that Martha was talking about, which I think is really important. In agencies, they build firewalls, and firewalls are great, and they cross-pollinate their experience in a specific category. We do pet care really well, or whatever that is. We also cross-pollinate, but we cross-pollinate strategically. I understand commercial. I've worked in this area. I can bring that thinking into it. Barb, you have expertise. You can bring that thinking into it. But when it comes to the team that's actually doing the work, I think it's really important that those firewalls and those exclusivities exist, because they are 100% thinking about that client's business, right? So I would say that those are a couple of things to look out for. If a a consulting company like ours isn't willing to either discuss some level of exclusivity for the period of time, especially because they're bringing you their good strategic thinking, or they're not willing to build firewalls, or those don't already exist, those would be things to think about.
I'm chiming in. I think it's helpful to make sure that this is going to sound weird. Make sure you have a business plan. And or no, have specific business goals. I want out in 2 or 3 to 5 years. I want to build a dynasty. I want to go into a joint venture. If you don't have those things in mind, and certainly we can help you find those things, but it's sure helpful to engage with, especially at a leadership level and a strategic level. It's helpful to have thought through some of those things before you start working with a consultant.
Yeah, I think I can think of a couple of those examples that we've actually experienced too. Sometimes, a leader will get so excited about something, they'll forget the order, right? That you need to maybe make things happen in, right? Where you need to make sure the technology and the product are in place before maybe the activation team, right? Some of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right.
I can even see, some examples that we've been in, Alec too, where some of the companies we work for in entering a new market could have actually utilized a fractional.
Yeah, it seems like,
right?
Mary and Martha, one of the things that came to mind as I was listening to you guys talk was that so it sounds like project-based work is a good area to try this out in, right? Because it's kind of, right, it's
for sure.
it's boundaried. So, and to me, that feels a little different than trying to fill a gap. I mean, it may be because you don't have the resources, but it's more of like something that's a carve out. So that's one way to approach this. I think I still kind of go back to tying it back to the concept of quiet hiring from a skill set and a gap standpoint. It sounds like the other way, though, that's different than project based is you have a need in an area, and this is one way to fill that need, and it can be for a short period of time, or it can be for a longer period of time, depending on how you find that works. Is that what you've experienced?
To answer the question really pragmatically, look at it this way. You have a startup, you're commercialized, but you're really trying to grow, and you decide, okay, we're going to hire a senior marketing person, or we're going to hire a senior growth person, or whatever that is. I've actually personally been in jobs where it was pretty clear that the functional description of the job was not a full-time job. Okay. And I alluded to this earlier, and we've seen this with clients. So one of the benefits that you get if you're flexible and you allow it to be really strategically driven, how you fill that role, you could very well be looking at saying, I'm now getting the benefit of a more senior qualified person in a role for the same money or for less, because they're capable of doing the job at 80% or at 70%, because that's what the job really requires. And I think that is a huge benefit. And those are the cases in which you might see a fractional engagement go on for a longer period of time.
Yeah, you've got to be able to, you check the ego at the door, right? Which is sometimes you don't need that senior level person for the time frame, especially after you've done the strategic work, you've gotten through the problems, and now you're in an activation mode or a maintenance mode for that client. You're seeing the growth that you want. You can flex that. That's the right thing. That's actually thinking like the client, right? Versus thinking like an outside agency.
You brought up something really important, Barb, the ego thing. Again, a real life example is a client who was working with a very, very small startup with limited funding. And somebody decided, well, but we need an agency, and we need an agency that understands our industry. Okay, well, was that the right decision? The inflection point with them was it's not working. It became very clear that having an agency, because you have an agency and somebody thinks that's a wonderful thing to do with all the overheads and all the inherent lanes that Martha talked about in that, was costing them a lot of money, and it wasn't efficient and it wasn't working. Right. So you asked about watchouts. I think one of the biggest watchouts is that leadership that wants to work with quiet hiring really has to be flexible about how to get to the solution. They have to be open-minded about the fact that I don't have to pay for these services at this level. I also don't necessarily need to show that on my roster I have these people. I literally just need to find the right talent to get the job done.
And it sounds like you're saying that talent, that the right talent doesn't necessarily just mean it comes from an agency. I think in the minds of a lot of leaders, there's an
Yes.
assumption that, oh, I need some marketing help. I better go find an agency. That's not necessarily the case, right?
Right.
Think broader.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I also think when I hear you guys speak, some of the clients have needed, a heavy duty press launch, right? Some things, that may not be an ongoing activity,
Right.
but may be, situational.
Right.
That's an example that you've had as well, right?
Right. I mean, why you may have a business which requires 3 times a year an emphasis on what you're doing with the press, but then why would you retain an agency if you're paying a retainer for them every month? Right. So
Right. We've seen that example, right?
That's a great example. Yeah.
What do you think? I think we've got a pretty good wrap up here. So what I heard us say is quiet hiring is particularly interesting on the marketing side as far as marketing services go, right? It's a good place to go. What I'm hearing is fractional leadership and strategic leadership is a great place to use quiet hiring because you may not need it long term. You only really need it in the thinking times and the strategy times, and at other times you may need less of it. So finding something that's very flexible can be really advantageous. I heard us say that it's a cost savings for sure because we're not hiring full-time people, and you're able to be more of a amoeba, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
To flex, more strategic at the beginning of a project and maybe more maintenance and activation later on in a project. What else did I miss? Is there anything else?
No, I think
on
you
this?
hit it all. I mean, those are some great points. I think that for me, the main takeaway was, at least for companies that are trying to figure out how to take the next step on marketing, there is a third option, right? It's not necessarily hired directly, and it's not necessarily go agency. You can fill it temporarily in between, and you can get kind of the particular skill set that you need in a certain time. But the most important thing is for business leaders, right? You have a clear understanding, and I think this is Martha, it was one of the big points you made. Clear understanding of what the business goal is, so that you can properly line up the marketing to go with it.
So if someone wants more information on quiet hiring or this company, we'll put some information in the chat about that or at the bottom of the show.